When I was 10, I imagined that I was going to have 10 children, and we were going to live out on a farm in a 2-story clapboard farmhouse. And the kids would run around with the dogs and the cows and whatever animals they could find. And I would make quilts and pies. And the kids would kind of raise themselves and be awesome, right? Out there in the dirt. In my late 20s, I finally got married for the first time and was in the middle of seminary with very little room in my psyche for children. I'd revised my number of children down to 2, and as my aunt had given birth to her 4th child while she was in her 40s, I figured I had all the time in the world to have my family after I finished my studies and found a job that combined a BA in English and an MDiv in God stuff. Both very employable, right? 10 years later, divorced and remarried, I was not getting pregnant. My early 40s were spent getting acupuncture, drinking foul herbal teas, carrying African fertility goddesses in my pocket, praying in a variety of modes and traditions, and going through 10 medical fertility treatments, highly experimental at the time, which involved smuggling drugs over the border from Mexico so I could afford them. I learned how to give myself injections with very long needles. I learned to ride out the artificial hormonal roller coaster. I went through 3 tax rebates, 2 inheritances from grandparents, and my savings account. And I stopped short of the equity in my home, which is why there's still a roof over our heads. The drugs had tampered with my brain chemistry in a way that intensified my anxiety disorder and put me on an SRI for the rest of my life. The SRIs got me through the end of my second marriage, some job changes, and the beginning of the second half of my life, should I live to be 101 like my grandmother, who did not, by the way, have children in her 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s. At that point, I was a confirmed lifelong member of the In-Fertility Club, the women who actually want children and can't have them club. I was as gracious as I could be as my friends raised families, and some had late children in their 40s. I was angry every time I heard about a child born to a teenager who put the child in a dumpster or under a tree in the park in Altadena. I felt like God was punishing me for a variety of imperfections and mistakes, even though my theology didn't fit the emotion. This wasn't God. This was a result of choices and biology, a natural outcome of my life trajectory. But I raged at God anyway, and luckily God can take it, right? Much like Sarah and Hannah and Elizabeth, and a million nameless, infertile women who were judged much more harshly than I was in their time and culture for not producing sons. Then I met John, who wanted children, whom I encouraged to go and date breeders. Go. But who persisted in dating perimenopausal me anyway and decided to forego biological children for adoption. 7.5 months after my 51st birthday, I gave up on the adoption, turned our nursery back into a guest room, and moved on. 1 week later, the social worker called and had me at hello. Peter was 2 weeks old when we brought him home. The sudden move from the childless club to the motherhood club nearly snapped my neck with his speed. Amazing. Within moments, I was welcomed and embraced, given advice and encouraged, commiserated with, and thrown 6 baby showers, one at each of the churches I had served as It was surreal, and my guilt was palpable. How could I join a club that refused to have me as a member most of my life? How could I abandon my compatriots in the land of infertility? So I didn't abandon them. I allowed myself to be a member of both clubs, half a life in each. It's been a hell of a journey. If I want to philosophize about it, the first half was preparation for the second half. But that's kind of true about life as a whole. We gain the wisdom later that we could have used when we were younger. Now that I'm in my post-fertile years, I am mothering a kid who demands the energy of a village to keep up with him. And I'm grateful every moment for the village that has grown over those years when I had the energy and time and motivation to give to the villages of other people's children. And I'm grateful for the other Hanas who are raising children and grandchildren in our Older Mothers Club. There's even one of those, if you can believe it. We recognize the damage done by the infertility, the subtle exclusion from conversations and events, the stories we couldn't tell before now. We recognize the effort it takes to come up with the energy demanded by this 24/7 responsibility. I did not know what 24/7 meant until Peter arrived. And we admire fiercely the single parents who are taking one day at a time. Sometimes I don't know how they do it. We smile across birthday party tables at the tired gratitude we older mothers feel for the chance to experience something that cannot be imagined, and the scars that still tug at our hearts, wounded by our earlier emptiness. Hannah had more reasons than I did to feel the wounds of infertility. Her theology made God responsible for her situation. She was lucky to have a loving husband, but suffered from the fertility of her competition in a polygamous marriage. She lived in a culture that demanded fertility as a value, part of the marriage dowry, and punished infertility with judgment, devaluation, exclusion, and rejection. Sons were needed to take care of their parents in their old age and infirmity. And in her religion and culture, sons were the only access to immortality, as they were the ones who recited the Kaddish, the funeral prayer for the dead. And they were the ones who carried the memory, the name, the character traits, and inherited the physical property of the father. No sons, dead dynasty. It's not good. But these values have not vanished entirely with time. My Anglican grandmother, whose first love returned from World War I with PTSD, which they had not diagnosed back then, and married someone else, had a late marriage to a Jewish naval officer arranged by her father, the admiral. She was given the mission to give birth to sons and raise naval officers. Hence my father, whom you've all met. Given the names of both his father and his grandfather, Albert Gleaves. Cadets at the Naval Academy in Annapolis were appointed by state senators. She knew one of the senators in Tennessee, but they lived in Philadelphia. So when it came time to give birth, my grandmother traveled to Washington, D.C., where young men born in our nation's capital can be appointed by senators of any state in the Union.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In labor on a train, can you imagine? When her sister died and her children came to live with them, she aimed her two nephews in the same direction. Her value was in both her fertility and her support of the family business. And believe me, there was damage done, along with the usual family adventures. My dad was born left-handed and swears his mother forced him to be right-handed because you could not be left-handed at the Naval Academy. And that's why he thinks that he stuttered, but they took care of the stutter too. It's a lot of work raising a naval officer. More recently, I have family members of my own generation who have chosen not to have children, and they've been judged and castigated by family and strangers alike, as if there is something wrong with them, as if they were being selfish, as if their unrealized fertility was an act of treason. And I'm sad to say that the suffering of Hannah in many forms is alive and well in 2015. And I've only been talking about the United States and Western culture here. There's plenty of other examples of the damage done by infertility in other cultures. One of the first questions when a couple gets married is, when will you start having kids? A chronically single child is made to feel guilty for not providing grandchildren. And those of us who want children and are unable to give birth to them are told to relax, to pray about it, to keep trying, that God has a plan. One of the worst things somebody kept saying to me was, if you just relax, quit trying, you'll get pregnant right away. People get pregnant when when they're getting raped. Okay? So relaxing has nothing to do. We are pitied, unconsciously or systematically ignored, judged, and we wrestle with self-worth, family marginalization, conversations we have no invitation to join, and guilt for all our negative feelings about other people's joy, and a host of other complex idiosyncrasies that might lead any priest to think we were drunk. The trauma of infertility is not PTSD, but it is a wounding that bears notice. Not everyone who wants children can have them, and not everyone who is infertile chooses to adopt. Those are completely different choices. One of the doctors said to me, if you don't have kids, you can adopt. Different choice. Different choice. Those are completely different, and it doesn't resolve the issues of the failure or the condition or the experience of infertility. So if we're looking for a theological angle on this, yes, it is natural for humans to blame God or the gods for our plight, and to thank God when that gift of a child comes across, much like our children's sermon today. It's natural to feel like we are being punished by the universe for our conditions and choices. It's interesting to note that Jesus didn't have children, right? But there are myths and stories about Jesus and Mary Magdalene hooking up and having a kid on the side. Yeah, we just can't leave that alone. We're obsessed with fertility, and it goes deep. And my only advice as a member of both clubs is to pay attention to the stories of those around us and to be kind, like Elkanah, Hannah's husband. What a kind man. Resist natural urges to judge or question, and affirm anyone in our choices and conditions, allowing each of us to be where we are on life's journey, welcome as full and valuable members of the beloved community. Thank you all for your kindness. You are kind people. It's a good thing.